This video corresponds with your week 3 part of your course project. So I'll do the same thing that I've been doing in the previous videos, where I will review the assignment and then do a demonstration of what I expect you guys to do when you submit your assignment, again using Zoom. For each variable, you're going to run the statistics that are appropriate for each variable given the level of measure of the variable. You will do statistics that measure central tendency and dispersion, and you will know or should know which statistic or statistics are appropriate based on the level of measure for each of your variables. What you're going to submit is a Zoom presentation of a few to several minutes where you teach your hypothetical students what statistics to use and when, and then you'll illustrate or provide examples using your own 3 variables. So you'll go through each of your variables, talk about which statistics you selected for each of those and why, and then of course you'll use the share feature, share screen feature in Zoom to demonstrate SPSS and how you actually ran the analysis. So you're going to go, and then you'll go through the output for your variables and interpret it for both the measures of central tendency and the measure or measures of dispersion. And I give an example, I lay an example out in writing in the week 3 assignment description. I'm going to use share screen right now and go through what it should look like when you actually do the assignment. So let's get started. Okay. So you can see here that I have my data set, and again, your data set will have 100 observations and not 50, or at least 100, I should say. So what you're going to do is you will go to Analyze, and again, you will be teaching this when you submit your Zoom video. Descriptives, frequencies, and you're going to do these one at a time because depending if your variables are different levels of measure, then you would use different statistics. So we'll start with political views. I'm going to go to statistics for measures of central tendency. Now here's the thing, you guys can decide. So this, for me, this is an ordinal level variable, and it would be for you too. So since this is an ordinal level of measure, I would do median and mode. I'm going to have you later in the semester, you're going to calculate statistics, including the mean, even for ordinal level variables, even though technically it's not appropriate. So even though this is an ordinal level variable and technically you shouldn't calculate a mean, I'm still going to do it just to go through the interpretation, and you are free to do that also for ordinal level variables only. Don't calculate the mean for a nominal level variable. You cannot have a mean gender. There is no average between male or female. So you do not want to calculate a mean for nominal level variables, but if it's ordinal level, I'm okay with you treating it like it's interval ratio. You're not required to for this specific assignment. There will be an assignment later in the semester, and I will tell you, even though your variable is ordinal, you still should calculate the mean. For this particular assignment, I'll leave it up to you. So if you want to calculate the mean for an ordinal level variable, you can. If you don't, if you say, you know, it's not appropriate, I'm going to do the median and the mode, then that's fine too. For measures of dispersion, we know that the variance and the range are for continuous variables only. This is not a continuous variable, so I would not request any of these. Again, even though this is an ordinal level variable, I'm going to go through the exercise for demonstration purposes. And again, later in the semester, same thing with mean. I'm going to have you run calculations on ordinal variables that normally would be reserved for continuous or interval ratio level variables only. So I'm going to go ahead and request the standard deviation and the range. We know the range for ordinal variables. If it's a 1 to 5 scale, then the range is 1 to 5, unless somebody didn't select a 1 or a 5. then I suppose the range could change. But for the most part, when you have an ordinal level variable that's 1 to 3 or 1 to 5, that is the range. So we typically don't calculate a range, or we don't talk about a range unless it's for a continuous variable. So if you have a variable like, let's say, age, and let's say you sampled a jury pool. So technically the age of a juror could be, in most states, 18 to, however old, 85 or older. But let's say, even though technically that could be the age, you would want to calculate a range, because for your particular sample, maybe there were no 18-year-olds in that jury pool that you sampled. So the age range might be 23 to 68. So you would want to calculate a range for continuous variables like age. Or let's say I looked at GPA in a class. A range could be 0.0 to 4.00. But let's say the GPA range in my class was 2.1 to 3.8. I would want to know that. So that's why we calculate a range for continuous variables, but not other types of variables. But again, I'm going to go through the exercise here just for illustrative purposes. And again, you're free to do this for your ordinal level variables, but you're not required to for this particular assignment. Okay, so I've requested the relevant statistics. I'm now going to click continue, and then I'm going to click OK. And of course, we know that we have 55 cases for this variable. You guys, again, will have more than 100. So the mean for political view is a 3.16. And we know that it was a 1 to 5 scale, with 1 being very liberal and 5 being very conservative. So we would say, not really surprisingly, the average political affiliation was moderate to slightly conservative, because it's slightly over 3 going toward 5. Now, if it was like 2.9, it's still very close to moderate, but it's slightly more liberal than conservative because it's going lower, and the lower numbers mean more liberal. So the mean here is moderate with a very slight leaning toward conservative. The median is 3. Which means that half of my respondents were at or below moderate, and half of my respondents were moderate or on the conservative end. The mode is 3, which means that the most common response in my sample was moderate. So most of my respondents identified themselves politically as moderate. The standard deviation is 1.2, which means that the data are not real spread out, and they're not super close together. So on a scale of 1 to 5, the standard deviation is a little bit more than 1 point. And that's the average case of each observation from the mean. So if the mean is right around 3, on average, the average variation of respondents was a little bit more than 1 point from the mean. The range is a 4, which just means the range went from 1 to 5. If you take 5 minus 1, so the high value minus the low value, you get 4. So a lot of times when we interpret range, we give the high and low value. We don't give a single digit. So we would say the range was from 1 to 5. We had respondents who said they were very liberal, which was a 1, and we had respondents say they were very conservative, which was a 5. Again, this calculation, this 4, comes from 5 minus 1, but we typically don't, we typically give the high and low ends. We often don't actually do the subtraction. And then if you take a look at this, you can see that the modal response right here, 15, most respondents were moderate, which was the 3 that we saw above. You can see that more respondents were very conservative than very liberal, but it looks like a pretty normal bell curve. You know, there were almost even numbers on liberal and the conservative side, and then very liberal and very conservative. And then it talks, you know, this is the percent of respondents that fell into each category. The cumulative percent is not meaningful. And the valid percent was the same as the percent because there were no missing data. If there were missing data, the percent and the valid percent would be different. But since there were no missing data, then the valid percent and the percent are going to be the same. So once you are done with this, I would recommend saving it. I'm not going to save this, but you guys should. So I'm going to say no. You're going to go through and do the same thing. So descriptive frequencies, you would need to move your first variable back and then go on to your second variable, do the same thing, statistics. Now for me, this is the same level of measure, ordinal, as my first variable, so I'm just going to request the same statistics. Now, if this was a nominal variable, so let's say that you're looking now at gender, you would not calculate a mean and you would not calculate a median for gender. You would not calculate these measures of dispersion. For gender, you just talk about how many respondents fell in each category. And then you would do the same thing. You would click continue, you would click OK, and you would go through the interpretation. When you were done with that, you would do the same thing. You would close out of it, you would move your second variable back to here, and then you would move your third variable over, go back into statistics. Okay, this is, let's say it's ordinal or interval ratio, and I want to all three. I want to look at all three measures of central tendency. I'm going to look at standard deviation and range, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click continue, and I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to interpret the output. And again, I would save each one, and I would probably save it as frequency political view with central tendency or something like that, or detailed frequency political view, detailed frequency religiousness, detailed frequency attitudes toward capital punishment. Just make it, I would recommend saving it in a way that's meaningful to you, and use the same or a very similar file name, so you know if you call this a detailed frequency, call all three of these detailed frequencies, so you know that it's the same output for each of your variables. Or you could just put them into the same folder called detailed frequencies, however you want to do that. But I would just recommend to make your project management easier at the end of the semester when you need this information again to put together into your final project, whether it's screenshots or screen sharing if you do a final Zoom video, that you have really easy access and that it makes sense to you when you're like, okay, I need to talk about how to define and run a frequency and interpret that in SPSS, that you would be able to just pull that up in a matter of a couple of seconds versus trying to find it or having to rerun stuff at the end of the semester. So again, I hope this helps. You should be able to go through an identical process for the three variables. The difference would be if your variables are different levels of measures, then you would request different statistics and interpret those differently. Again, let me know if you have any questions about anything. I hope that the video tutorials are helpful to you. Next week is actually going to be a really short Zoom presentation that you're turning in, so it'll give you a little bit of a break. So hopefully that'll help you out a little bit, but you are definitely well on your way. We're almost halfway done. So I hope everything is going great, and let me know if you have questions.